So, welcome to this week's episode of Crap No One Tells You. And with me today, I have an architect, Kevin Smith from Stampfl and Associates.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome. So, let's not wait around. Let's just get right into it.
That's their style, Gummy. Go for it.
What is the crap no one tells you about being or becoming an architect?
When I was in school, I can remember first day of orientation. Boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, if you're here to make money, you're in the wrong place. If you're here thinking you're going to be Mike Brady or something, because, a little older than Brady Bunch, and you're going to be able to support 8 kids, you're in the wrong place. You should be here if you're passionate and if you love what you do. If you're lucky, the person to the right of you and the person to the left of you will be gone 5 years from now, and you'll be the only one left.
Wow.
And he was right. That was the dean of our school. That was 1988. And I think it was like 20% graduation rate. It was brutal. People wanted to be the best. They
Right.
stayed up for hours just to have the best drawings, 3-4 days in a row. The competition and mentally was just, one day we had school 5 days a week, 9 a.m. to 12. You get in there, professor talks for 2 hours, 55 minutes. Your assignment is due the next day. He gives it to you in the last 5 minutes of class. So, Gummy, I want you to describe your personality to 12 facets. I want you to have what's called a partie sketch, an idea, concept idea. And it's due the next day. You just haven't come in your lab. You don't have any materials. So everybody goes to the bookstore, buys stuff. We stay up all night just to basically be the best. Now, this guy, Joe Burton, he studied under Louis Kahn, which is a real famous architect. And he rips you to shreds for 2 hours, 55 minutes, redo things. But you could already see the genius in some kids. Later in the semester, you could see the sketches that they created. That was the column detail that they used for this room, or this was the threshold detail they used for that part. I found myself overwhelmed with the amount of thought that went into things. So what you don't know is some of it's we call talkitecture. It's very intellectual. It's not the real world, but in design, there's a lot. Like if you ever study a snowflake, and it's unique to God, snowflake has no designs replicate. Our profession is very serious. Shouldn't take it that way, but some people can take it very seriously. I don't know if you ever met an architect in real life to know.
Yeah,
Besides me,
I know a couple. I know one lady that was obsessed with towers. She added towers to every building. And I always asked her why. And she's like, because I think they're regal. And I'm like, okay, I guess whatever floats your boat. But I don't think most people in general have a full understanding of what an architect does, right? Like we all see the Sydney Opera House and all these things and the famous architects and these crazy buildings around the world. And people are like, oh, that's what architects do. And I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure your architect designs your extra room that you want to add to your house.
Architects design anything in the built environment that needs to be regulated by the building codes. So, an opera house like Sydney Opera House, that's governed by very detailed building codes. But, a house, you don't need an architect to do a house. You can, as a person, basically use the building code and use the tables of the building code and go as owner builder. But usually an architect's needed when a public occupancy is needed, where the general public visits a building and health and safety and welfare comes into play. Fires, big problem. Lawsuits, wind damage, earthquakes, any kind of problem where somebody could be hurt and the building has to be insured is governed by the building codes. And that's when you need an architect. You need a design professional. Under the building codes, engineers can design a lot of buildings, and architects can do a lot of things that structural engineers and civil engineers can do. There's some overlap in the professions, but typically an architect doesn't do a bridge, but sometimes a civil engineer will dabble and do a building. So it's kind of back and forth, but we have uniform building codes now across the 50 states, but some states have seceded from that and have their own codes. I just read I'm licensed in Florida. Florida is now completely seceding from the building codes that are governed in most states, their next code cycle, which is going to be very interesting.
So are they going stricter or are they going
Oh, much
looser?
stricter.
Okay.
They're testing right now for what we call a Category 6 hurricane, which doesn't exist. They're testing for 190 to 210-mile-an-hour sustained winds. Right now,
That's insane.
yeah, that's supposed to be the climate change, where things are going. Right now, we're doing a house in the Keys for the office, and that's Miami-Dade. That's 155 to 165 sustained winds that you have to design for it. You have what's called a missile impact test, where they shoot a 2x4 or 2x6 at that velocity at a wall, and it has to be able to sustain it and withstand that impact without being damaged. Most people build down there with concrete, masonry or concrete. It's the only structure that's really going to sustain that. But with climate change now, we're going to go and we're going to start seeing Category 6 hurricanes. And our industry is already starting to prepare for that. And that's one of the reasons why Florida, I think, is moving away from the model codes and doing their own thing. Because let's face it, it's all insurance and it's all lawyers. That's what drives our society. Insurance companies and
Yeah.
if the underwriters won't insure.
So architects, once again, goes to show how little people know about that profession in general, I think, is I don't think people understand that an architect's job is partially to look into the future and figure out what could possibly go wrong in this area and then design a house accordingly. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, you have to look at building types. It's not just housing. It's, for example, a lot of people right now in the senior living industry are skittish that industry as a whole might collapse or might have an issue. Because when COVID started, if you remember, the start of that pandemic in this country anyway, I think was in the Seattle area or the Washington state, it spread through nursing homes.
Yeah, that was the first.
And now the new codes that are coming out are going to be making those kind of building types have mechanical systems that are almost like clean room level,
Wow.
because people want to feel safe. And if they don't have the mechanical system with the ventilation that can treat airborne illnesses, you're not going to get people to sign up for those places. Consequently, you're also not going to get workers that feel safe in that environment. So the pandemic has changed a lot.
So you guys are really dealing with a whole new type of approaching a lot of these designs and concepts just because of what happened during COVID.
A lot of things in the housing industry, for example, I think you're going to start seeing maybe the death of the office complex. A lot of people don't necessarily want to work in an office anymore. They like the flexibility of working from home. Couples want maybe flexible work-live arrangements where they can have her offices, or 3 offices, one for the kids, one for him, one for her, instead of just one study in the home, because you're conducting more and more business from the home. It's interesting to see. My daughter, she told me about one of the consequences of the first pandemic. I don't know if you remember the Spanish American flu.
Yeah.
The women's suffrage movement, that was benefited by that. I don't know if you're aware of that. So many white men died that pandemic that were opposed to women voting, that there was enough that died that held past that. We're just now starting to see trends from this pandemic that are going to affect us. And we start seeing that as architects up front in changes of way people live and what they want out of their designs and what they want for their lives.
Because you guys are looking at the next generation of houses being built right now. So like the stuff we haven't seen yet as consumers, you guys are conceptually designing right now for the people that are looking to build in the future.
Correct. And we're starting to see trends. And a lot of trends are people are enamored more with staying home and feeling safe and wanting to basically have a quality of life. Maybe the younger generation's idea of being happy isn't going to a
Right. 9 to 5 and
being in a little cubicle and going out just at lunch.
having a boss yell at you all the time.
Maybe their idea is to be flexible, with the internet and with communication the way it is. As long as they hit deadlines, if they get something done,
Right.
and they want to go out to the beach during the day and the company allows them to do that, a whole different way of life.
So I know you guys do both commercial and residential, right? what are some, if you had to tell me about like a cool project you did recently, what would be an example of what you do? Like, what's a project? Like, what does it entail?
So we just finished a project that won an award. I think I mentioned that at the meeting for Rob Lowry up at Dublin. And his vision was to kind of take the center of Dublin Borough and create a walkable community for people. So he sold the back half of it to Ryan Holmes, and they built a bunch of townhomes. And then there were some out parcels. He has a brick building that was live work, and he has a lot of offices in there. We were hired to do an outpatient medical facility for Greg Health, and we were also retained to do an apartment building over retail. So what I like about that project is you're kind of creating a little city where people can work and live and buy things, and they don't need a car. Yeah, you still need a car.
Yeah, but
But yeah, I like little villages where you don't have to go very far away to get your
so they're almost becoming like little communes. Like that's the trend right now is, are you guys seeing more of those?
Yeah, if you just look at what's happened around King of Prussia, it doesn't. We're starting to see that younger folks aren't as interested yet in the suburbs.
Right.
Their quality of life is,
And they don't necessarily want to go into the cities. So you're looking at these areas that are 15, 20 minutes outside of the cities where you have these self-contained
correct.
environments
Little
almost.
villages.
Right.
They're looking for entertainment. They're looking for dining out. They're looking for a grocery store right in that general area in a little walkable community. So I think you're going to see more redevelopment or urban infill. The challenge of that is just getting enough parcels so you can create that in enough, space. You're starting to see that because urban sprawl hasn't hurt us or hasn't helped us as a society. People are disconnected. And I think if people can walk and have a sense of community, have a sense of place, and they feel identity, I think that they're going to feel more proud about their community.
Okay. So when that landowner came to you and said, "Hey, I have this project. I want you to build this community," right? What is involved in that process from your guys' end? Do you guys have to go out and measure the land and then figure out the layout and like design the buildings, decide everything?
With a group of professionals, civil engineer Gilmore Associates was already involved in that property. There's a phase of approvals called entitlements that on a project like that sometimes could take anywhere from 5 years to 10 years, where you got to bring the land in, you got to go through the borough, you got to get approvals. Zoning change had to happen because 313 is a public road. It's governed by the state. You have to interface with PennDOT. There's a lot of regulations. These things normally are handled by land use attorneys and civil engineers. The architects involved, but more along the lines of once the site is titled and we know what we're dealing with in terms of footprint, then we can start designing the building.
So you basically get it from someone like a civil engineer that says, "Here's the footprint you're allowed to use for the buildings." And then the landowner will say, "Here's the requirements that I'm looking for." And then you guys have to marry all of that into what we see as
it's a little more complicated. That's kind of the genesis. There's what's called for every municipality in Pennsylvania is called a SALDO, zoning ordinance.
Okay.
And usually that zoning ordinance breaks portions of a municipality or a borough or a township down into districts. And inside those districts, there's
Do
rules.
most states have that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It'll tell you what your coverage is, what your square footage is, your footprint, what your height limit is. There'll be bulk restrictions, density restrictions, all sorts of restrictions that you as an architect have to take into account. The owner may give you a program. In this case, they said, "I wanted as many units as I can get. But wanted a mix of 2 bedrooms and 1 bedroom." We had on this particular site an environmental contamination line, which was an angle, was really strange. And there was some contaminated soil that the owner did not want to remediate and take out. So we had to design the building around that angle, and it created an interesting facade, but the building had steps, and it was just a straight rectangle because we could not go over that. So I had to interface with the civil engineer to make sure that the wall of the building and the cladding of the building could go over it, but the overhang of the roof could go over it. So there was all sorts of rules. It was kind of stupid because you're digging a big hole in the ground anyway to do the foundation. You're disturbing
Right.
the ground anyway. But this was the rule, and it was governed by environmental rules in Harrisburg. And so we had to adhere to that.
So really, you are basically creating just within a bunch of rules, and then you get to put personal design touches on what, like the outside, the inside, the
All of it. It's a synthesis of a lot of things. What's the program of the owner? What are the needs of the marketplace based on what the owner is telling you? Is he realistic or she realistic about what they're looking for? What are the parameters of the cost of the day? When this project hit, we were in the middle of COVID. Now, yes, supply chain issues.
right.
We started with some things that might have been a little more grandiose. We had to pull back and do value engineering. Then, fortunately, the contractor in this project, Penn Valley, they bought a lot of the products and what we call commodities up front. They could store them. They weren't hit with other projects in the area where they were delayed for
Right.
weeks and months because they couldn't get cabinets or they couldn't get windows.
Right.
They
Couldn't get garage doors,
Yeah.
couldn't get
Yeah.
and then when you finally could get it, there was a 300% price increase, right?
Yeah. And then this building, for a small building, it's like 56,000 square feet, not huge. It had almost all the different building construction types you could know. It had slab on grade foundation system. It had structural steel, poured in place concrete. It had wood framing. It had metal stud framing. It had concrete unit masonry, concrete block. The only thing it really didn't have was post-tension pre-stressed concrete. So you had a lot of different building assemblies. And then because it was a mixed occupancy, you had retail on the ground floor, parking garage, and then residential up above. You have fire suppression systems and different types of fire suppression systems and then different fire assemblies to protect each one of those occupancies. So that's, excuse me, I'm just voice here.
So
I find mixed use buildings are complex, but I find them to be the best use of an architect because you have to know your code.
right. So really, this is where you said there's a lot of overlap, and this is where my sense of architect versus engineer starts getting muddled, right? Is I was always under the assumption that you guys do the stuff we see and the engineer does the stuff you don't. Does that make sense? Like architects do what I see, the outside, the inside, the walls, the room layout, but then it's the engineer's job to make sure that it's structurally sound or figure out what materials are needed to support it. And
A little bit. We're kind of we manage the process. We do all what you said, but we also manage the process. So for example, under our contract, I hired the structural engineer. I hired the mechanical engineer, the electrical engineer, the plumbing engineer, the fire suppression engineer. So I may come up with the drawings and the concept, the base drawings, but in our business, change management is huge. Just like I'm sure in your business, things change. You find out different things. People want to move this wall. We have to do this and that. So we have to edit our model, our Revit model, and then issue it out to each one of the consultants.
So you guys really create, let's call it the rough draft or the first draft of what you would like it to be. And then everybody gets a chance at nitpicking at it or kind of figuring out this could be better this way. This will need this for this reason. But you guys are still the top of the pyramid, so to speak, is that everything funnels up to you guys and you have to make changes on your drafts based on recommendations from all the engineers, from the electrician. I mean,
yeah,
all of those people,
all the consultants. And, on this project, we had review of submittals, construction administration. It's a more complicated project. So we had issues during construction. No project's perfect. No set of drawings is perfect. So you have changes that go on. We had trusses. One truss manufacturer bailed. And it cost the contractor a lot of money to substitute another. And because of that truss manufacturer, we had to redesign a roof. We had to redesign stair towers. We had to trace point loads differently because their systems were a little different and they wanted it designed a little different. So we had the building already permitted. And now we had to go backwards to go forwards to change things.
So here's what I'm hearing. If you want to be an architect because you think it's about making buildings look pretty, you're wrong.
I think that's only part of it.
Right. That's what you'll be doing a small portion of the time. The rest of the time you're dealing with project management. Like you sounds like you're more of a project manager than actually.
Well, that's my role in the company.
Right.
We're a mid-sized, small to mid-sized firm. If you work for a larger firm in Center City, you may just be a designer. And that's all you do is draw pretty pictures all day long because you have a skill set. You've been hired to do that and you enjoy doing that. Other people may just do stair details. Other people may do elevator details. So larger projects that I've worked on for bigger firms, there's thousands of drawings in a project. The convention center, Philadelphia Convention Center, or a high-rise building. You need a team. Our office is only 12 to 14 people. We get to wear a lot of hats. My role, I manage a huge chunk of the office, contracts. Yeah, I do design still. I have the overall view, but I'm having somebody doing the renderings. I'm having somebody do the drawings, and I'm reviewing what they're doing, giving them input. Do I still draw? Yeah, but I don't draw as much as I used to because, my seal's on the drawings and I have to be responsible for all the other crap that
Right.
doesn't get done.
So there are still positions out there for architects that are strictly design.
Correct.
They're just few and far between, it sounds like, or you have to do it
It's about 2 to 3% of the industry is strictly just design. Yeah.
So you need to be in the top 2% of designers,
If
architects.
you go into school thinking you're going to be a designer, you probably have, unless you're really, really good, you probably have not the most realistic sense of what you're going to be doing.
Right. That's kind of interesting because I remember I was out in California, and I was at a convention, but they brought in for that specific meeting someone that does 3D renderings of commercial buildings. So I remember one of the ones they showed was they were redesigning some office building for Boeing. And they literally pull up on the screen this 3-dimensional look. Like it felt like you were at the office. And it was just fascinating to me because now all of a sudden you had the architects, you had the computer designers, you had the 3D modelers, and you realistically could almost do a full walkthrough of the building before they had done anything. Like it felt like you were in the building. Do you think that is something that's going to be coming more to your industry? Like, is it going to be?
It already is here. It's big. The bigger firms, the larger firms have that. One of the firms I worked for before where I'm at now, we had a test project and it was $50,000. And this was 2014, 15.
Okay.
So God knows what it is now, where you wear the goggles,
Yep.
the virtual reality
Yep.
goggles. It views the retina in your eye. So this was a project that we were working on in Lansdale. It was a TOD, transit oriented development, 6-story apartment building near the train station. And you could use your eyes and look through and pick the color of your cabinets, pick the color of the floor. It felt like when you were walking around, if you were on the balcony and there was a pool below you, 4 stories below, like you felt like you actually were in the
Wow.
I've seen that technology. It's great. It's just very expensive.
Yeah.
And for most building owners, they probably won't pay for that. Large scale projects that are controversial, or projects that have to go through years of approvals, then it makes sense. For the average project now, until that technology is more affordable, you probably won't see it on the mainstream, but it's there and it's being used. And when you see master plans for new communities, there's a whole new project, I guess, down in Morrisville or Philadelphia area where they're going to do like a brownfield development. I'm sure they're going to use something like that for it.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how far along, like everything else, technology has made so many things an option when it comes to reviewing things that are being designed before they're built. Because, we always say when you're managing a project, when you're doing something, it's always easier to change the paper than to change the project.
Now,
right?
change the computer.
Right.
I thought by now we'd be at holograms. I really thought technology would be faster in my lifetime. I thought by now I'd be able to slice through your head and you'd be, Australia somewhere.
Right.
You'd have all. We're not there yet, but I think someday we will get there, uh, where you wouldn't be able to see. Look at what the phone's done in terms
Right.
of, I have people that basically go out and survey on phones, or their little not their laptop, but their little
Their
iPad.
iPads or
I
whatever.
think
Yeah.
survey. Instead of the old fashioned days, which I still use, the tape measure and the
Right.
old fashioned scale.
And the wheel with the right.
So you've seen a lot of change. And what I like about this industry is you never stop learning. There's always something new. It can be overwhelming because there's always new laws, there's always new codes, but there's new building technologies and there's new ways to do things. And that is always changing and it's cool.
So if someone listening is thinking about becoming an architect, they got all excited by this conversation. What would be one piece of advice you would give someone that's looking at getting into architecture today?
Visit construction sites, see how things are built. Unfortunately, our industry does not do enough of a good job in school of teaching young students how things are built. You'll become more marketable, more valuable to a firm if you learn or spend some time working on a construction crew, working for a framer, just understanding how things go together. Just go up to any old job site that you see where things are being built. Say you want to be an architect and just spend some time talking about how you knew this made sense.
Get a summer job as a framer.
Yeah.
Or
Because people that do that are valued because so many people see it as lines on a drawing. They don't understand that people use the tools, the instruments that we create to build things. And they don't understand the consequences that if you mess up and the concrete is in the ground and it's in the wrong spot,
right.
costs a lot of money to jackhammer concrete.
Yes, it does. So, well, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much.
And we will bring you back possibly to talk some more about project management when it comes to construction sites.
Cool.
But so thanks everyone for tuning in, and we will be back next week with another episode.